everyone, my name's Neil, I'm a recovered drug addict.
Neil?
Pick me up from there, probably will. I haven't done any preparation for this at all, really. It's good to be here. If you're new, welcome. Here is where I found recovery, in rooms of CA. So, I suppose just to paint a bit of a picture, a bit of my story. I was an intravenous heroin user by the time I was 18, 17 going on 18. I went through the whole drug party scene very, very quickly. You know, a lot of my buddies, they still go out on the weekend and they pop a couple of pills and they do a bit of Charlie, and some of these guys I used to know. And some of them even got into heroin and got full-blown heroin habits. Some of them even started smoking crack and got full-blown crack habits. And most of them, you know, maybe bar one or two, including me, of the group of people that was there in the beginning when I, first started experimenting with drugs, most of them, something happened in their lives. They made a decision. They got married. They emigrated. They went back to university, and they got their lives together, and they didn't do it again. Are they a drug addict in the sense that I am? I don't know. But this is just what I noticed happening. My story was a little bit different in the sense of that I could make a decision to stop using. I could do a detox, and I could get clean and sober, and I would start doing really well. I'd go back to college. I never emigrated or got married, thankfully. It'd been a whole new story. I'd go back to college, and I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. I would do well. There was no trauma-related stuff for me going on. For me, once the drugs were removed from me, I found I was able to sort of engage with society sort of relatively well. Outwardly, inwardly, I was pretty screwed up. But I don't think that was anything to do with drug addiction necessarily. It's just, I don't know, just that kind of, just my thinking was all a bit kind of screwed up, I guess, in some ways. But for all intents and purposes, I could function and I would be all right, But then something would happen, invariably. I'd be doing so well that I thought, well, maybe I will just, maybe have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I would find myself back into, the whirlwind of drug addiction, which is a pretty awful place to be, which is why all of us are here this evening. If our lives are going well, if we were managing to control our using, none of us would be here. So, that's me. When I start to use, I lose control. But, the thing is with that, heroin's nice. Crack's pretty moreish. It's just like, I'm pretty sure most people, if you gave them enough of it for a while, they would get a bit of a taste for it. But the thing for me was there were definite signs very early on that when I use drugs, I don't use safely. So there were indicators, warning signs, such as getting remanded on my first offence, and just not normal stuff going on around drug use that say perhaps someone who has a bit of a dabble at the weekend does. And it was obvious even back then when I was 18 years old that it doesn't end well for me when I use. So I had all the reasons in the world to not go back to using drugs again, and I had all of the reasons in the world to continue with the new life I was trying to create for myself, and yet I would still find myself one way or another going back to it. Whatever the thinking was going on at the time, everything's going great, I'll have a use. Oh, this is really hard, I'm struggling, I'll have a use. Yeah, and always thinking it was going to be different and I was going to sort of handle myself differently, or it was just going to be the one, or it was just going to be the weekend, and again, invariably there might be a period of time, 2 or 3 months for the last relapse, where I would have a modicum of control, kind of, I would have days off, in other words. I wouldn't have a habit, But then, eventually it would just all, just slip away from me, and I would find myself back in it. And that's what happened to me in 2006. In 1999, I've been hanging around 12-step fellowship since 1999, and I went into a 12-step treatment centre in Gloucestershire, and I got 6 years of sobriety off the back of that, and then about a year of shady kind of getting pills off the doctor, and that I didn't really need to take, and no, it wasn't recovery. It didn't feel like recovery, and then went back to it. I remember making the inevitable phone call to my parents, to my dad, to tell them that I was using again, which explained why I'd been asking them for money, and because of this had gone wrong, and that had gone wrong with my bank accounts, and they were like, yeah, okay, kind of makes sense now. But they couldn't believe it. After 6 years of, 6 years clean and sober in a world that mostly isn't. I did some cool stuff. I managed to build a really nice life for myself. They couldn't believe it. I remember calling my mate Steve he lives up in Blackpool. He was one of these guys. He did way more heroin than I ever did. I mean, he would go over every time he had a hit. I mean, he was chaotic user. He had yardies after him from Gloucester because he'd smoked all of their crack that they were stashing at his flat. I mean, I think he inherited £10,000 from his grandma when she passed, and bought a car, and he had to basically sign over the car to them to stop them from killing him. This dude, the consequences for him and how his drug use spiralled out of control for him was way worse than it ever got for me. But he made that decision. He was like, I remember it, I think I was about a year sober. I just got out of the treatment centre. I was in a halfway house in Stroud in Gloucestershire. He wrote me a letter and said, I'm sorting myself out, I'm on Subutex, I'm detoxing, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to get a degree, and I'm going to get on with my life. And I remember thinking, oh, that's a lovely letter. Good luck with that. And that's exactly what he did. He did exactly that, and he's never gone back to it. And I remember calling him after 5 or 6 years, because obviously we re-established our friendship, and told him I'd relapsed and that I owed him some money for a guitar and an amp that was in a pawn shop, that I was really going to buy back on my next payday, but never did. It just, I don't know. I've never been able. All I'm saying is I've never been able to do that. That's never worked for me. A firm resolution, promise to myself, promise to my parents, promise to partners, children. There's never been enough to stop me from moving back into that again. The other thing really that should have prevented that from happening is I'd spent 6 months in the treatment centre, a year in a halfway house, looking at all of my stuff. I did a step 4, with a different sponsor, who sponsored from a different book, who didn't sponsor from the AA Big Book. It was nearly 400 pages long, step 4. I shit you not, of just like self-analysis and really clever stuff. I've still got it. There was diagrams on it and everything. I'd looked at my shit, I'd looked at myself, and and I'd looked at what happens to me when I use, and the whole thing really was based on, I built my entire recovery on the idea that if I just keep in mind how bad my using was and what happens to me, and some knowledge about myself as a person and what my defects of character are, my triggers, the things to look out for, it won't happen again. And I built my entire recovery on this foundation, and what I've learned now from the Big Book is that I don't have any power over whether I use again or not, which to me was really difficult to get my head around, when I came here. And so I had all of these things in place. I had a great life. It was 5 years into my recovery last time. It was absolutely unthinkable that I would use again. Just absolutely unthinkable. And you know, I do say this sometimes, you know, I was going to meetings you know, and people come to meetings and they relapse and they fall out in the meetings and they're using. And I lived in a small town where this was happening, and I would see them around the town begging and stuff like that, and they'd be my buddy, you know, clean and sober. We'd had fun, we'd gone out and done stuff together, and I'd see them begging. Well, you know, they were the people obviously that I went to after I'd relapsed, you know, and you know, my advice is don't do that. If you relapse, don't go and seek out other people in the meeting that you know you've relapsed, because it's just not pretty. You know, you do end up sitting in a room smoking crack, 12-stepping each other. It's no kind of fun at all. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, so I found myself just caught up in it again, and I remember going back to the meetings, back to my old sponsor who I hadn't really connected with for a while, and telling him what's going on, and you know, bless him, he came straight around in a car and took me to loads of meetings in different areas. Neil, just go to a meeting every night, and you know, do 90 meetings in 90 days. You know, phone me every morning, and you know, and again, it just felt like putting all of these things in place again, and I kind of knew that it wasn't going to work for me because I'd had these things in place before. And yet it had all just sort of unravelled. Yeah, so that was a 10-year spree. And the other interesting thing that happened there, I really thought I was planning to do it. I'd already started popping pills that I shouldn't have been taking. And I remember thinking, right, I came up with a plan in my mind. So this weekend I'm going to get some gear. And this is how it's going to go. I'm just going to do a bit of gear for the weekend because obviously, you know, I've stepped over the line. I have stepped over. I have relapsed. I am going to have to go back to my meeting and tell people and pick up a white keyring. I don't fucking care, you know. And but being as I have relapsed, I might as well just have a little weekend of what I really want. And that weekend turned into 10 years. Every day, 10 years. You know, and then the thing I do is I get back on prescriptions and drug services and doctors, and they're all trying to come up with solutions for me. Well-meaning doctors, you know, as the book says, trying to come up with solutions for me as to what's wrong with me. Is it depression, Neil? Are you depressed? Oh yes, doctor, you know, I'm feeling a little bit depressed. Well, we've got some amitriptyline. If you take these, are you not sleeping yet? Well, no, I'm not sleeping. Well, we've got some zopiclone. If you take these with your amitriptyline, you know, and the doctor's solution, bless them, was to give me more drugs for my drug problem. The drug services solution was to give me more drugs for my drug problem. And I understand why. I work in drug services, and actually, a heroin addict who's on a high-dose maintenance methadone prescription is 4 times less likely to die than and commit crime and contract blood-borne viruses and all of this if they're on therapeutic dose of methadone than if they're not. So the statistics are, you know, you go to a drug service, boom, there you go, that's what they do. You know, if you're a cocaine addict, they haven't got much for you, I'm afraid. You know, if you're alcohol dependent, they don't use the word alcoholic. If you're alcohol dependent, then you know, they can give you a load of pills and detox you, and go, that's better, isn't it? Off you go, and then they come back to us in 6 months. Yeah. What we're talking about in Cocaine Anonymous is permanent sobriety. That seems to be what's happened for me since I've been involved in what we do here. My friend over there, Nick, you know, he started off his share the other week with something like, he said, it's an absolute honour to be sitting here and an absolute mystery as to why I'm sitting here. And yeah, man, I identify with that. Absolutely, definitely. I could come up with a load of reasons for why I stopped using and why I'm clean and sober today, but you know, for me, around the step 1 stuff in the book, it's pretty clear that I use for no reason. Therefore, therefore, my being in recovery is almost like saying my being in recovery is for no reason. And what I mean by that is if I'm powerless over the first drink or drug, then I'm powerless to bring about my own recovery. If I don't choose when I relapse or not, then I can't choose to be in recovery or not. For me, it's just the same thing. It's the same. It's a different, other side of the same coin. Yeah. I lost somewhere along the line. Somehow, I lost the power of choice in drink or drugs. If I had the power of choice in drink or drugs, I would have gone to that treatment centre and I'd have done like my mate Steve up in Blackpool. I would have made a decision. I would have stuck to it. Yeah. For me, I make that decision and it always goes out the window. And it appears as though I'm making another choice, but it's not. It's not. Relapse happens to me. So if relapse is happening to you and you're new in Cocaine Anonymous, welcome. We talk about this stuff. Thank goodness we talk about this stuff. Because this was happening to me and I didn't get it and I didn't understand why. What makes me different to my buddy Steve who can make that decision and stop using? Why can't I do that? What's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me. Well, thank goodness I found another group of people here who had the same thing wrong with them. And we're sharing about that. So we don't know why we relapse. We don't know why this works. That's why that reading from that chapter there, it's not called why it works, it's called how it works. This is what I did. It is a bit of a mystery. So what I did do, I was kind of at the end of my rope. I was going to drug services in tears because I didn't know where else to go. I knew meetings weren't working for me anymore. Saying to my support worker in a drug service I was going to top myself, and just because I just couldn't bear, just horrible shit going on. I was squatting in my own flat. I was going to McDonald's for toilet paper, sugar and milk, and just horrendous. Picking up cigarette butts the lot. It was just no kind of life, and I couldn't pull myself out of it. So I was kind of at the end of my rope, and I went to see someone at the drug service, actually, who said, have you checked out CA meetings? And I didn't really didn't really know anything about CA, and this isn't about what's better or what's best, or one fellowship or another. I have friends in different fellowships who have great programs and great recovery and beautiful lives, as a result of coming together and in the spirit of fellowship like we do. But for me, I think I just got, after 20 years of trying in certain sort of types of meetings, I think I just got really tired of it, and I needed to hear something different. And actually, I went to a CA meeting that was in Worcester on a Monday night, and this meeting, it started with a small group of people over in Cheltenham who were talking about this Step 1 stuff. From the big book, and we're really getting forensic about what the big book was saying about relapse, because that's really the crux of the problem for me. The problem is I relapse. How do I stop this? What's going on? I need to understand. First of all, I need to understand: am I a relapser? Does this happen to me? And how what do I do about it? These guys are talking about this stuff, and they were the first people to say to me, "Well, there's nothing you can do about it, Neil." And I was just thinking, well, how is that helpful? I've come here for a solution. I've come here for some answers, and an explanation, and for someone to say, it's okay, if you do this, you'll be fine. They weren't saying that exactly. Well, actually, what they were saying is, Neil, you're fucked. Neil, if this, I got taken through the first few chapters of the big book with my first sponsor at the time, and he said, Neil, if this is happening to you, you're doomed. You're screwed. This is going to keep happening. And I was kind of hearing that and taking it on board, and I was thinking, and I was looking at my experience of I'm reading Bill's story, I'm reading chapter 3, and I'm going, yeah, that happens to me. All of that, I identify with all of that stuff in the book. That happens to me. But still, something hadn't quite come together and connected for me, and this was the bit that I couldn't force or do something about. I could understand this stuff. I could match my experience to the description of alcoholism in the big book, but that still didn't bring about that surrender for me. What did happen, I went out on another spree. Heroin and crack cocaine were the great persuaders for me. What brought me to it was another spree, another relapse. I was still on scripts at the time, by the way, but I went out and had just a horrific week. And I remember at the end of this week calling the guy who was trying to sponsor me at the time. I say trying to because I wasn't being honest with him, and that was the only thing. I had a really open-minded guy, as a sponsor at the time, who was willing to work with me as much as possible while I was on a methadone prescription. And I called him and just told him what had happened. And, he made me write it all down, everything I'd done that I'd been secretive about. And I don't know, that just kind of, I just felt totally exposed. And I remember going back to my flat and there was a realisation, and it was almost like a physical sensation. I mean, it was like a punch in the guts. It was just, ooh. And the thought was, it wasn't, I suddenly, in this moment of clarity, I suddenly saw the consequences and that if I carry on, I'm going to die and this has to stop now. It was, Neil, this is going to keep happening and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And that just broke something that was kind of resisting, and this sounds like a paradox. There's another word for it, I can't think of it. It's almost like when I stopped beating on a door of recovery, the door actually opened. It's a really strange thing to, I got surrendered. I was unable to bring about my own surrender to the program of Cocaine Anonymous. Eventually, I got surrendered. I don't hate heroin and crack cocaine for doing that for me, but that's just how it was. And then I was just ready. And then the interesting thing about being surrendered, not by choosing to surrender, the steps became about changing me as a person, to make me more less self-centered and more thoughtful of others. I never saw the steps this time as a relapse prevention strategy, because my experience is I do all the stuff, I tick all the boxes and I use again. So it was a very different experience, and I think it's page 51 or 52 in the book, someone will correct me no doubt, where there is just a line which suggests to me, around about step 2 in the book, that suggests to me that from after step 1, the steps are not about drinking and drugging, which is leaving aside the drink question. We had to ask ourselves why we were making such difficult going of life, something like that, I'm paraphrasing. So for me, the steps were about getting right. I was brain damaged. I'd had 10 years of sitting in a flat, shouting at the TV, only going out to school and pick up my methadone, and, as I've already said, get milk and sugar and toilet paper from McDonald's. And that was it, or over to the parents to drink their beer and get some food off them. So there was a lot of growing up I had to do, and the steps did that for me. It was also the example of more senior members in Cocaine Anonymous. Cocaine Anonymous, the meetings were an arena for me to learn how to talk to people again. I mean, if I wasn't a quiet one, really, because I'd just been sat at home not really talking to anyone. I found every time I went to a meeting I couldn't stop talking, just talking shit, and people were very patient with me, and so there was a combination of things. I had the support of a meeting, had a sponsor, I had the information in the big book, and with that I swapped over to a different type of opioid substitute treatment. Despite my best efforts, I could never drink methadone like a gentleman. So that had to, I just went to drug service and said, I'm going to be ill, but just put me on a different something else. And then I said, put me on a reduction. Just do it. Because after that punch in the gut sort of realisation, there was a really strange sense of relief from that. I had a sneaky suspicion that it had stopped, that the relapses had stopped for them. There was a kind of a window of opportunity, maybe. I think what had really happened is I'd just ceased fighting it. I'd ceased trying to bring about my own recovery, because it was my efforts to bring about my own recovery that were actually stopping me from really listening to what was being said and really having that kind of creating that space, having that space here for what was being said to kind of then sink in. And then, it was just like, I did my detox in the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous. I had service positions. I've always done service. I turned up every week, whether I'd used or not. I mean, sometimes I was going out, not during this period, but before this. I was going out and scoring halfway through a meeting, coming back in, and I detoxed. I did a step 4 while I was detoxing. Not so controversial these days to say that. I wasn't using. Ebby sat and had a conversation about recovery, and there wasn't the 12 steps then when Ebby spoke with Bill in his kitchen, but essentially Ebby took Bill through steps 1, 2 and 3 while Bill was working his way through a bottle of gin. It's right there in Bill's story. And then Bill had this spontaneous awakening type experience. I did a step 4 because I was just ready. I was just ready. I was done. I had ceased fighting, and I did a step 4, and basically, and I came off my Subutex. At which point my sponsor at the time said, well, okay, we need to just put the brakes on here, Neil, because I was just lapping it up, I was just going for it. He said, we need to put the brakes on before you go out and make your amends. You can't really go out and make amends for what you did when you were using and the harms you caused as a result of your drug addiction while you were still taking drugs. So it was pause at that point. But really, once I came off of Subutex, I hit the ground running. I had, and I went, and as soon as I had the energy to walk up the hill, I went and made amends to my parents, and I cleaned up my past, and I had a meditation practice going. I was doing regular inventory, because again, my head was screwed. Meditation just really helped to slow the thinking down a little bit. Inventory, there's some tools in this book that really help me to just kind of look at things from a different perspective, not from a self-centered perspective, to actually look at how I behave and interact with the world, and what's working for me and what isn't. And to just sort of continue to do that. And then, really it just began to take up a kind of a momentum of itself. It became a much more, natural process. If something was bothering me, I would look at it, I would address it. And the whole point of doing that was so that I could then go out and help the next person. And that's what it's been about. I'm not here for me in my recovery today. I'm here for someone else in their recovery. Someone who was like me, baffled by what's happening to them, wants to know what's happening to them, and I can show them what I did, and I can talk about what happened to me, and that might be helpful for someone. So that's why I turn up. Okay, people are tapping their watches, so I'll quit there. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you, Neil. I'm going to open the meeting up now for people to share back on what they've just heard.